"Don't cry, mister. You can borrow my mom," said the little girl to the CEO sitting alone during Christmas Eve. On the coldest night of the year, a powerful CEO sits alone in an airport lounge, just hours after destroying thousands of lives with one decision. He thinks he's invisible, untouchable, until a small child walks up to him and offers him the only thing he's been missing: family. For one unexpected night, a struggling single mother and her 2 children share a simple Christmas meal with a man who has everything except peace. But what he doesn't know is this: their pain is connected to his past decisions. And when the truth finally comes out, kindness turns into heartbreak, forgiveness feels impossible, and everything he built begins to collapse. Was this meeting an accident or a test? Can one moment of innocence undo a lifetime of harm? And when redemption costs everything, will he still choose to do what's right? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The executive lounge hummed with the subdued energy of the holidays. Laughter muffled by privilege, champagne poured without celebration. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, snow fell in thick, silent curtains across the tarmac, blurring the red and green runway lights into watercolor smudges. December 24th, 5:47 p.m., James Hartford sat alone in the corner, a leather armchair swallowing his frame despite his broad shoulders. His suit was charcoal grey, perfectly tailored, utterly unremarkable, the uniform of men who commanded boardrooms and commanded nothing else. His phone lay face down on the mahogany side table. Silent, as it had been for hours, he stared at the glass of bourbon in his hand. 12 years old, single malt, $70 he'd never notice missing. He'd ordered it 17 minutes ago and hadn't taken a sip. The ice was melting. Across the lounge, a little boy squealed as his father lifted him high, spinning him in dizzying circles. A woman in a red sweater embraced someone. Her mother, perhaps, tears streaming down both their faces. An elderly couple held hands in matching Christmas sweaters, their silence more intimate than any words. James looked away. The layoffs had been finalized at 2:14 p.m., precisely as scheduled. 473 people. HR had handled the notifications remotely. Clean, efficient, no messy confrontations. His role had been ceremonial, signature on the final document, brief statement to the board. Necessary restructuring to ensure long-term viability. The stock had jumped 3 points by closing bell. He'd done this before. Twice. It never got easier, but it got more familiar, which was almost worse. His assistant had offered to arrange Christmas dinner, reservations at whatever restaurant he preferred, or catering delivered to his penthouse. He'd declined with a curt email, and immediately regretted the tone. Sarah didn't deserve his terseness. She had 2 kids and a husband who actually came home at night. A flight announcement echoed overhead. Final boarding for flight 2847 to Minneapolis. He wasn't flying anywhere. His penthouse was 20 minutes away by car, but his driver wouldn't arrive until 9 p.m., his own instruction, issued that morning when he'd still believed he might need the time alone. Now the hours stretched before him like a prison sentence. His reflection stared back from the darkened window, ghostly and accusatory. 52 years old. Silver temples, sharp jaw, eyes that had learned not to flinch. His father would have called him successful. His mother, gone 15 years now, would have asked if he was happy. He wasn't sure he remembered what that word meant. A family gathered near the windows, 3 generations pressed together as they watched the snow. The grandmother dabbed her eyes. The children bounced with uncontained energy. James found himself calculating. Round-trip tickets for 6, economy plus, holiday rates. Probably $4,000. More than most of the people he'd laid off today earned in a month. The thought arrived uninvited and unwelcome. He finally lifted the bourbon, let it touch his lips. It burned going down, harsh and expensive. He set it aside. The lounge was thinning now as flights departed. A janitor moved quietly through the space, emptying trash bins, wiping down tables. She caught his eye and smiled, a real smile, warm and uncomplicated. He nodded back, the gesture stiff and inadequate. When had he last smiled and meant it? His phone buzzed. Not a call, just a notification. Corporate email. Happy holidays from the Hartford Industries family. Automated, sent to 15,000 employees, former employees. He turned it face down again. The snow kept falling. Families kept reuniting. And James Hartford sat in his expensive chair, drinking expensive bourbon he couldn't taste, wondering when exactly he'd become a man with everything and nothing at all. The clock above the bar ticked toward 6, 3 more hours until his car arrived. He closed his eyes and tried not to count the minutes. The lounge had quieted considerably by 6:45 p.m. Most of the holiday travelers had claimed their flights, leaving behind scattered newspapers and half-empty coffee cups. The janitor had moved to the far side of the space. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, something instrumental and melancholy that matched the snowfall outside. James had relocated to a seat nearer the windows, though he couldn't have said why. Perhaps the isolation felt more honest here. The bourbon sat abandoned 2 seats away. He'd given up the pretense of drinking it. He didn't notice her at first. The little girl materialized beside his chair like a small, determined ghost. She couldn't have been more than 6, wearing a purple coat with toggles shaped like hearts and sneakers that lit up with each step. Her hair was gathered into 2 puffs, secured with glittery elastics, and her dark eyes studied him with the unsettling directness of children who haven't yet learned to look away from pain. "Don't cry, mister." James blinked, startled. His hand moved reflexively to his face. When had that happened? His cheeks were wet. He turned away quickly, fumbling for composure, for the mask he'd worn so long it should have been permanent. "I'm not—" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "I'm fine. You're sad?" She said matter-of-factly. "It's okay. Everybody gets sad sometimes, even grown-ups." She tilted her head, considering him with grave sincerity. "You can borrow my mom if you want. She's really good at hugs. And she says hugs make everything better, even when they don't really, but they help anyway." Something in his chest fractured. The sheer innocent absurdity of it. This child, this stranger, offering him something no one had offered in years. Kindness without calculation. Comfort without agenda. He tried to speak and found he couldn't. A sound emerged instead, something between a laugh and a sob, raw and undignified. He pressed his fist against his mouth, shoulders shaking. "Mia!" A woman's voice, urgent but not harsh. "Mia, baby, come here right now." The mother appeared, moving quickly despite obvious exhaustion. She was younger than James, mid-30s perhaps, dressed in jeans and a worn peacoat, a large backpack slung over one shoulder. Her face was beautiful in the way that comes from character rather than features. Strong cheekbones, expressive eyes, a mouth that looked accustomed to both laughter and prayer. "I'm so sorry," she said to James, reaching for Mia's hand. She wandered off. I told her to stay put, but she caught sight of his face and stopped. Her expression shifted from apology to concern. Is everything all right?" James wiped his face with the back of his hand, aware of how he must look. "Yes, I'm fine. He gestured helplessly. "She surprised me." "I told him he could borrow you, Mama," Mia said, entirely unrepentant. "He's crying, and it's Christmas Eve, and nobody should cry on Christmas Eve. That's what you always say." The mother's face softened. She crouched down to Mia's level, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. "Baby, you can't just walk up to strangers even if they look sad. We talked about this." "But Mama, I know, sweetheart. I know your heart is big. But we need to be careful, remember?" She looked up at James, apologetic but not intimidated. "I'm sorry. She has a very strong sense of justice, I guess you'd call it. Sees someone hurting and thinks she can fix it. She's kind," James said quietly. "That's rare." "It is." The mother stood, keeping Mia's hand in hers. "We'll let you be. I'm sorry for intruding. Wait." The word escaped before he could think better of it. They both turned back. He scrambled for something to say that didn't sound desperate or strange. "Thank you. For raising someone who still cares." The mother studied him for a long moment. Her eyes were dark and searching, seeing more than he wanted to reveal. Finally, she nodded. "Merry Christmas, sir." "Bye, sad mister." Mia waved with her whole arm. "I hope you feel better." They walked away, the mother steering Mia gently back toward a seating area near the far wall, where a boy, older, maybe 10, sat reading a book with fierce concentration. The mother settled between them, pulling Mia onto her lap, saying something soft that made Mia giggle. James watched them. The boy looked up from his book, said something to his mother. She shook her head, smiling. A family. Small and tired and together. He turned back to the window, but something had shifted. The armor he'd spent decades constructing had developed a crack, small but definite. And through it, for just a moment, he felt something other than the cold. His phone was ringing. He ignored it. By 7:30 p.m., the lounge had become a graveyard of cancelled flights and delayed departures. The snow had intensified, reducing visibility to nearly nothing. Airport staff moved through the space with apologetic efficiency, distributing blankets and meal vouchers. The announcement system crackled with bad news set to cheerful music. James remained at his window seat, though he'd stopped watching the snow. Instead, his attention kept drifting, unconsciously, irritatingly, to the family across the lounge. The mother had spread out their belongings with practiced efficiency. Backpacks as pillows, coats as blankets, books and a coloring pad to keep the children occupied. They didn't complain. They simply adapted. His phone had rung 4 more times. He'd declined each call without looking at the name. "Excuse me." He looked up. The mother stood beside his chair, Mia peering around her legs. Up close, he could see the weariness in her face. Not just today's fatigue, but something deeper, more enduring. The kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. "I'm sorry to bother you again," she said, "but Mia won't settle down, and honestly, I think she's worried about you. This is going to sound strange, but would you mind sitting with us for a little while? Just so she can see you're okay? You can say no. It's an odd request, I know." James should have said no. Every instinct cultivated over 30 years of corporate survival told him to politely decline, to maintain boundaries, to avoid complications. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'd like that." Surprise flickered across her face. "Really? If you don't mind." "No, She smiled, and it transformed her face entirely. "We'd be happy to have you." They sat at one of the small tables scattered throughout the lounge, using airport takeout as an impromptu Christmas Eve dinner. The mother had meal vouchers from the airline, and she insisted on using one for James despite his protests. They ended up with lukewarm pasta, slightly stale bread, and coffee that tasted like it had been made that morning. It was the best meal James had eaten in months. "I'm Grace," the mother said, extending her hand across the table. "This is Mia, and that's Theodore." "Theodore," James repeated, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm and warm. "That's a strong name." The boy looked up from his pasta, assessing James with careful eyes. It was my grandfather's name. He was a pastor. A good legacy to carry, James said. Theodore nodded slowly, as if determining whether James meant it. Apparently satisfied, he returned to his meal. And I'm Mia. The girl bounced in her seat. Do you have kids, sad mister? Mia, Grace said gently. We don't ask personal questions like that. It's all right, James said. No, I don't have children. Why not? Mia. I never married, James said simply. I worked instead. Mia considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. That sounds lonely. It was. God, it was. Grace seemed to sense his discomfort and smoothly changed subjects. Were you trying to get home for Christmas? No, I live in the city. My car is coming later. He hesitated. What about you? We live here too. We were at the airport because our church serves dinner to staff who have to work on Christmas Eve. We help sometimes. She smiled at her children. The kids like coming. They get to meet people from all over the world. And we get hot chocolate, Mia added importantly. That too. Grace laughed. They talked as the evening deepened outside the windows. Grace asked him safe questions, where he grew up, what he liked to read. James found himself answering honestly, editing only the details that might identify him. She didn't press. She seemed content to take him at face value, a lonely man at Christmas, nothing more. In turn, she spoke about her children, about their school, about small moments of grace that sustained her. She had a gift for finding light in ordinary things. Theodore's report card, Mia's elaborate imaginary games, the kindness of neighbors. She didn't mention hardship directly, but it lived in the spaces between her words. At some point, Mia fell asleep against Grace's shoulder. Theodore pulled out his book again, but read companionably rather than defensively. The airport lights dimmed for the night shift. Someone had stuck a small, slightly crooked Christmas tree on the bar, its lights blinking in algorithmic patterns. James pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and set it in the middle of the table like a candle. Grace laughed. Are we having a romantic dinner, Mr. He'd never given his name. James. James. She repeated softly. She pulled out her own phone, adding its light to his. Well, James, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Grace. Theodore looked up from his book and added his phone without comment. 3 small lights in the gathering darkness. Somewhere, a pianist played Silent Night on the lounge piano, the notes drifting across the empty space. For the first time in years, James Hartford felt something unclenching in his chest, something like warmth, something dangerously close to belonging. He didn't let himself examine it too closely. Not yet. The evening stretched past 9 o'clock. Mia had woken briefly, begged for a story, then fallen asleep again with her head on the table. Theodore remained alert, quietly observing the adults' conversation with an intensity that suggested he was cataloguing every word. The conversation had drifted into memory, the inevitable territory of people sharing unexpected intimacy. Grace spoke about Christmas traditions she tried to maintain for her children. Midnight service at church, homemade cinnamon rolls, reading the nativity story before bed. It's different now, she said, her voice soft with remembered loss. We're still figuring out who we are as 3 instead of 4. James set down his coffee. You lost someone. My husband. She said it simply, without drama. 4 years ago, heart attack. He was only 34. I'm so sorry. Thank you. She traced the rim of her cup. The hardest part isn't the grief anymore. It's trying to be enough, mother and father both, making sure they remember him but don't live in the past, teaching them his strength without his bitterness. Bitterness? James asked carefully. David had a hard time at the end. Grace's voice remained even, but her eyes distant. He lost his job when the factory closed, couldn't find work for months, felt like he'd failed us. The stress... She shook her head. I don't think it caused the heart attack, but it didn't help. Something cold slid down James's spine. What factory? Riverside Manufacturing, about an hour north of here. Made automotive parts, small stuff but steady work. Employed half the county. She smiled without humor. They shut down overnight. Corporate decision. Workers came in one Monday morning and found the doors locked. No severance, no notice. Nothing. James's hands went still on the table. David was devastated. He'd worked there 12 years, believed in loyalty, in showing up every day and doing good work. He thought that mattered. Her voice remained calm. Too calm. The kind of control that comes from telling a story so many times it's been worn smooth. He wrote letters, made calls, even drove to the corporate office once, tried to talk to someone, anyone. What happened? James heard himself ask, though part of him was screaming not to know. Security escorted him out. He came home that night, and I'd never seen him look so small, like something inside him had broken. She looked at Theodore, then Mia, making sure they weren't listening. He had the heart attack 6 weeks later, massive, gone before the ambulance came. Theodore spoke without looking up from his book. I remember. Grace reached across the table, squeezed his hand. I know, baby. Mama wrote a letter too. Theodore continued, his voice, matter of fact. To the CEO. Asked him to reconsider, to help the families. She was very polite about it. Grace's face tightened. Theodore. She was. The boy insisted. She said please and thank you, and explained about Dad and the medical bills. She told him about me and Mia. She asked for mercy. And? James's voice was barely a whisper. Nothing. Grace said. No response. I don't think the letter ever reached him. Or if it did, I was one voice among thousands, easy to ignore. She met James's eyes. I don't blame him, really. Men like that don't think about people like us. We're numbers on a spreadsheet. Acceptable losses. James couldn't speak. His mouth had gone dry. Hartford Industries had acquired Riverside Manufacturing 7 years ago. James had ordered the closure himself, restructuring, efficiency optimization, elimination of redundant facilities. He'd reviewed the reports, signed the documents, never visited the site. Why would he? The decision had been sound from a business standpoint. The stock price had rewarded him for it. He'd never read the letters. His assistant filtered correspondence, flagged only what required his attention. Routine complaints went to HR, to legal, to departments designed to absorb and neutralize such things. He'd never known David's name. Never would have, if not for tonight. James? Grace was looking at him with concern. Are you all right? You've gone pale. I'm fine, he lied. Just tired. We should let you go, she said, glancing at her phone. It's after 9:30. I'm sure you have people waiting. He didn't, but he nodded. Yes, my car should be here soon. They stood, Grace gently waking Mia, Theodore gathering their belongings with quiet efficiency. James walked them to the lounge exit, his legs moving mechanically while his mind reeled. Thank you, Grace said, for spending the evening with us. I think Mia was right. You needed company. So did I, James admitted. The truth of it ached. Grace shifted Mia to her hip, the girl's arms wrapped tight around her mother's neck. How are you getting home? The trains aren't running this late on Christmas Eve. We'll manage, Grace said. We always do. The words struck him with unexpected force. We always do. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. Let me help, James said. Please, I have a car coming. Let me take you home. Grace hesitated. "That's very generous, but it's Christmas Eve," he said, hearing the desperation in his own voice and unable to care. "Please, it would mean a lot to me." She studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face made her decide. "All right, thank you, James." His town car arrived 15 minutes later. The driver, Marcus, who'd worked for James for 8 years and knew better than to ask questions, held the door while they climbed in. Mia fell asleep immediately against her mother's shoulder. Theodore claimed the window seat, pressing his face to the glass as the city lights streaked past. James sat across from them, watching Grace's hand stroke Mia's hair in unconscious rhythm. She'd given him her address without embarrassment, an apartment complex on the south side, the kind of building James's company owned dozens of through subsidiary real estate holdings. He made a mental note, stopped himself. What would he do with that information? They didn't speak during the drive. The silence felt heavy with things unsaid. When they pulled up to the building, a tired brick structure with a broken playground out front, Grace gathered her sleeping daughter. Theodore climbed out first, holding the door. "Thank you again," Grace said. "This was very kind." "Grace." His voice stopped her. She turned back, waiting. "Your husband. I'm sorry for what happened to him. What happened to your family. You deserved better." Her eyes glistened. "So did a lot of people, but thank you for saying so." She disappeared into the building, Theodore trailing behind with their backpacks. The boy looked back once, his gaze sharp and assessing, as if memorizing James's face. The door closed. The building swallowed them. James sat in the town car, staring at the building's dark windows. "Home, sir?" Marcus asked. "Yes," James said. Then quietly, "No, drive around. I need to think." Marcus pulled away from the curb. The building receded in the rearview mirror. But James knew he'd never escape it. He'd just spent Christmas Eve with the widow of a man he'd killed. Not directly, not with his hands, but just as surely as if he'd pulled a trigger. The truth settled over him like the snow outside, cold, inescapable, suffocating. And there was no absolution waiting at the end of this drive. They circled the city for nearly an hour. Marcus drove in careful silence, while James stared through the tinted windows at a world that suddenly looked different. The Christmas lights strung across storefronts felt garish. The laughter of drunk revelers spilling from bars felt obscene. Even the snow, which had seemed peaceful earlier, now felt like a shroud. He'd built his career on clear decisions. Analyze data, identify inefficiencies, execute solutions. Emotions were noise. Sentiment was weakness. You couldn't run a company by feelings. But feelings had faces now. Grace's calm voice. "Men like that don't think about people like us." Theodore's sharp eyes. She asked for mercy. David, a man he'd never met, working 12 years, showing up every day, believing in loyalty, believing someone cared. James pulled out his phone. His fingers shook as he opened his email, scrolled back through years of archived messages. He found what he was looking for within minutes. The internal memo authorizing Riverside's closure. His own name at the bottom, his signature, his decision. He searched deeper, found the acquisition report from 8 years ago. Riverside Manufacturing had been profitable, not hugely, but steady. The closure hadn't been necessary. It had been optimal. They'd consolidated operations, reduced overhead, improved margins by 2.3%. 2.3%. David's life, Grace's husband, Theodore and Mia's father, 2.3%. He searched his archived correspondence next, though he already knew what he'd find. Nothing. His assistant had filtered the flood of complaints, appeals, and angry letters into oblivion. He'd never seen them, never wanted to. But Grace's letter existed somewhere, in a database, in a corporate file, in the digital graveyard where inconvenient truths went to die. "Sir?" Marcus's voice pulled him back. "It's nearly midnight. Should I take you home?" James looked up. They were stopped at a red light downtown. Through the window, he could see people leaving midnight mass at an old stone church, bundled against the cold, faces bright with candlelight and song. "Home?" he said finally. The word felt hollow. The penthouse was exactly as he'd left it that morning, perfectly clean, utterly empty. His housekeeper had decorated for Christmas with professional restraint, a modest tree in the corner, white lights, expensive ornaments that meant nothing. No stockings, no cookies for Santa, no evidence that anyone actually lived here. James poured another bourbon, his third of the night, though he'd barely touched the first two. This one he drank. It burned. He stood at the window, looking down at the city. 47 floors below, people were celebrating. Families gathered. Children slept with visions of tomorrow's joy. The world continued its rotation, indifferent to individual suffering, indifferent to James Hartford's sudden crisis of conscience. His phone buzzed. A text from the board chairman. "Merry Christmas, James. Hell of a job on the restructuring. Stock's up nicely. Enjoy your holiday." Hell of a job. James set down his glass, walked to his home office, powered on his computer, started searching. He searched for 2 hours, pulling up every file related to Riverside Manufacturing. Employee records, financial reports, the letters he'd never read. There were hundreds, thousands, stories of desperation, of betrayal, of families destroyed. Grace's letter was there, dated 4 years ago. Subject line, "Please, a mother's appeal." He couldn't bring himself to open it. Dawn was breaking when he finally stopped searching. Christmas morning. The sky over the city shifted from black to grey to pale gold. Snow still fell, gentler now. James sat back in his chair, exhausted and awake, wealthy and bankrupt. The CEO who'd spent Christmas Eve with the family he'd broken. The man who'd been offered kindness by the woman whose husband he'd destroyed. The stranger who'd been welcomed to the table by children whose father he'd never mourned. "Acceptable losses?" Grace had said, without a trace of irony. James pressed his palms against his eyes until colors bloomed behind his lids. There was no acceptable calculation for this. No spreadsheet that balanced the equation. No way to restructure his way out of what he'd done. But there had to be something. He opened a new document, started typing, a list, actions, possibilities. He didn't know if any of it would matter. Didn't know if Grace would forgive him if she knew the truth. And she would know eventually. The truth always surfaced. But he'd spent 30 years making decisions. Maybe it was time to make one that wasn't about profit. Maybe it was time to be accountable for the cost. Outside, the city stirred into Christmas morning. Somewhere in a modest apartment on the south side, a mother was waking her children. They'd open small presents. They'd make breakfast. They'd survive another day with Grace their father never got to see. And in a penthouse above the city, a man who'd spent his life climbing toward success finally understood what the view from the top truly revealed, how far he had to fall, and how much he deserved the descent. Christmas morning arrived with bright, cold sun, the kind that made fresh snow sparkle and transformed the city into something deceptively peaceful. James stood at his window with coffee he didn't taste, watching the light shift across the buildings. He hadn't slept. The list he'd started at dawn covered 3 pages now. Concrete actions. Reversible damage. He'd reviewed Hartford Industries' portfolio, identified every facility closure from the last decade, cross-referenced community impact reports he'd never bothered reading before. Riverside Manufacturing hadn't been the only casualty. There had been others. Smaller decisions. Larger ones. each justified by market pressures, shareholder expectations, fiduciary responsibility, each with names attached he'd never learned. His phone rang. He let it go to voicemail. Third call from the chairman this morning. James could imagine the message. Another congratulation, another expectation of normalcy. The board expected him at the annual New Year's gala, expected his usual performance, expected nothing had changed. Everything had changed. But not yet. Not publicly. James dressed carefully. Casual for once, jeans and a sweater instead of his armor of tailored suits. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. When had he gotten so old? When had his eyes become this empty? He thought of Mia's words. "Don't cry, mister." He grabbed his coat and left. Meanwhile, across the city, Grace woke to Mia's whispered excitement and Theodore's quiet shuffling in the kitchen. Their apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, worn furniture, but clean and warm and filled with evidence of life. Children's drawings on the fridge, library books stacked on the coffee table, photos on the walls, David smiling, David holding newborn Mia, David teaching Theodore to ride a bike. Grace touched his photo as she passed, a habitual blessing. "Mama, Santa came." Mia bounced on the couch, where a modest collection of presents waited, wrapped in newspaper comics because wrapping paper was an unnecessary expense. "He did, baby. But let's make breakfast first, okay? Theodore's already starting eggs." In the kitchen, Theodore stood at the stove with careful concentration. At 10, he was already self-sufficient in ways that broke Grace's heart. Too young to be so competent, too old to believe in Santa, though he pretended for Mia's sake. "Morning, Mama." He didn't look up from the eggs. "Did you sleep okay?" "I did, sweetheart. Thank you for asking." She moved beside him, took over the spatula. He yielded easily but stayed close, leaning against her side. Sometimes he still needed to be small. "That man last night?" Theodore said. "The sad one. Why did you say yes to dinner?" Grace considered her answer carefully. "Because he was hurting, and kindness doesn't cost us anything. But we don't know him." "No, but sometimes strangers need grace more than friends do. Friends can ask for help. Strangers have to hope someone notices." Theodore processed this. "Do you think he's still sad today?" "Probably," Grace admitted, "but maybe a little less alone." Mia crashed into the kitchen, still in her pajamas. "Can we open presents now?" "After breakfast?" Grace said. "Come help set the table." They ate together. Eggs, toast, the last of the orange juice. Grace watched her children and felt the familiar ache of gratitude mixed with sorrow. They had so little. They had so much. David should have been here. The thought came and went, as it always did. She'd learned to let it pass without drowning. After breakfast, they opened presents. For Mia, a doll from the church gift drive, new crayons, a book about a girl who loved butterflies. For Theodore, a science kit, a basketball, a journal with his name stamped in gold letters. For Grace, nothing from her children, they knew better, but a card they'd made together with words that made her cry. "I love you both so much," she whispered, pulling them close. "We love you too, Mama," Mia said, "even when we're mad about vegetables." Grace laughed through tears. Even then. They spent the morning at church, a service filled with music and testimony, neighbors becoming family in the way their congregation did best. Pastor Williams prayed for those who were lonely, those who were grieving, those who carried burdens they couldn't name. Grace thought of the sad man from the airport, wondered if anyone was praying for him. She hoped so. That afternoon, James found himself driving. Not aimlessly this time, but with purpose. He'd entered Grace's address into his GPS, before he'd consciously decided where he was going. He stopped a few blocks away, sat in his car, engine running, feeling ridiculous. What was he planning to do? Knock on her door? Say what, exactly? Hello, Grace. Remember me? I'm the man who destroyed your husband. Merry Christmas. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. This was insane. He should go home. Should call his lawyers, his board, his advisors. Should approach this rationally, through proper channels, with legal protection and strategic planning. Instead, he turned off the car and started walking. The neighborhood was quiet in that particular Christmas afternoon way, children playing with new toys, families visiting, the world taking a breath. Grace's building looked different in daylight, not threatening, just tired. The playground equipment rusted but still used. Sidewalks cracked but swept clean. People lived here, made lives here, found joy in what James would have called scarcity. He didn't approach the building. Instead, he walked the neighborhood, observing. A corner store with Spanish signage and Christmas decorations in the window. A community center advertising free tax preparation. A bus stop where an elderly woman sat with shopping bags, waiting patiently. This was where his decisions landed. Not in boardrooms, not in stock reports. Here, in cracked sidewalks and people doing their best. His phone rang again. He silenced it without looking. A church stood at the end of the block, small brick, with a banner announcing Christmas dinner at 3 p.m. All welcome. James checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. Before he could talk himself out of it, he walked inside. The church was smaller inside than it appeared from the street. Maybe 100 people crowded into a space meant for 70, but no one seemed to mind. Long tables lined the fellowship hall, covered with mismatched tablecloths and laden with food. Ham and turkey, green bean casserole, cornbread, sweet potatoes, pies of every variety. The air smelled like butter and cinnamon and something indefinably warm. James stood in the doorway, suddenly paralyzed. He didn't belong here. These people would see through him immediately, would know he was an intruder, an outsider, a welcome. A man in his 60s approached, wearing a minister's collar and an unreserved smile. First time joining us? Yes, I was just walking past and saw the sign. Then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I'm Pastor Williams. Come in, come in. No one stands alone at Christmas dinner. Before James could protest, he was swept into the crowd, handed a plate, guided to the food line by a woman who introduced herself as Sister Dorothy and insisted he needed at least 2 servings of everything. The congregation was diverse, black, white, Latino, Asian, young families and elderly couples, and everyone in between. James noticed the worn clothes, the careful portions some people took, the way parents ensured their children ate first. He also noticed the laughter, the genuine joy, the way people greeted each other like family because they were. James? He turned. Grace stood 3 feet away, Theodore and Mia flanking her like sentinels. All 3 stared at him with varying degrees of surprise. Grace. His throat went dry. I didn't know. I was walking past and saw the dinner. It sounded like a lie, even though it was technically true. Mia recovered first, launching herself forward. Sad, mister. You came. Did you stop being sad? Mia, please. Grace's tone was gentle but firm. She looked at James with questions in her eyes. This is a surprise. I'm sorry, I should go. I don't want to intrude on your Christmas. Don't be silly. She said it firmly, brooking no argument. You're here now. You might as well eat. She glanced at Pastor Williams, who'd appeared at James's elbow. Pastor, this is James. He had dinner with us last night at the airport. The Lord works in mysterious ways, the pastor said, his smile knowing. Come, James. Sit with us. There was no polite way to refuse. They claimed a table near the back, joining 3 other families who welcomed James without question. Introductions flowed. Names he tried to remember, stories he tried to follow, references to shared experiences he couldn't quite grasp. But no one made him feel excluded. They simply made space. Mia sat beside him, chattering about her Christmas presents. Theodore sat across, watching James with that same intense observation from the night before. Grace sat at the table's end, participating in multiple conversations while keeping one eye on her children. The meal was simple and perfect. James found himself eating not because he was hungry, but because refusing would have been insulting. Sister Dorothy kept appearing with more food. A teenager named Marcus, not his driver, a different Marcus, asked if he wanted sweet tea or lemonade. An elderly woman named Miss Edna patted his hand and told him he looked like her late husband. He was a good man, she said. Worked hard, loved deeply. I see that same heaviness in you, child. Life's been hard, hasn't it? James couldn't answer, just nodded. It gets better, she said. Not easier, maybe, but better. You just got to let people help carry it. After dinner, people mingled. Children ran between tables. Someone started playing guitar. A few voices joined in song. Joy to the world. Simple and sincere. James found himself at the coffee station, trying to look purposeful while feeling utterly lost. Theodore appeared at his elbow. Why are you really here? The boy asked bluntly. James looked down at him. I don't know, honestly. Mama says God puts people in our path for a reason. Theodore didn't sound convinced. But sometimes people put themselves there. Which one are you? I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that. Theodore studied him. You're rich, aren't you? What makes you say that? Your watch, your shoes, the way you hold yourself. The boy's perception was unsettling. Rich people usually don't come to places like this unless they want something. I don't want anything, James said. Then, more honestly, that's not true. I want to understand. Understand what? How to live with what I've done. Theodore blinked. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't that. What did you do? Before James could answer, before he had to decide what truth to tell, Grace appeared. Theodore, go help Miss Edna with dishes, please. But Mama, now, baby. Theodore went, but his backward glance was sharp. Grace turned to James. Her expression was difficult to read. Walk with me? They stepped outside into the cold afternoon. The sun hung low, painting the snow gold and pink. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, breath misting in the air. You didn't walk past accidentally, did you? She asked. No. How did you know I'd be here? I didn't. I came to your neighborhood looking for... He trailed off. Looking for what? Absolution? Punishment? Understanding? Looking for us. Grace finished. Why? Because I can't stop thinking about last night, about your husband, about what you've survived. He forced himself to meet her eyes. I wanted to see how you did it, how you keep going with Grace after everything you've lost. She was quiet for a long moment. You don't get over loss, James. You get through it, and you don't do it alone. She gestured towards the church. This community, these people, they're the reason I'm still standing. When David died, when I had nothing, they didn't offer pity. They offered presence. That's what saves us. Not money, not success. Just showing up for each other. I don't know how to do that. You're doing it right now, she said gently. Being here, being honest. That's a start. They stood in comfortable silence while the last rays of sun painted the world in impossible colors. James, Grace said finally, I don't know what brought you to our table last night or what brought you here today. But I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt So if you're looking for community, for connection, you're welcome here. No expectations, no judgments. I don't deserve that. Probably none of us do, but that's how grace works. It's not earned, it's given. Inside, someone called for Grace. She touched his arm briefly. Stay for the service if you want, or go if you need to. Either way, you're not alone anymore. Not if you don't want to be. She went back inside. James stood in the cold, watching the light fade, feeling something shift inside his chest. Not redemption. Not yet. But possibility. And for now, that would have to be enough. December 26th dawned clear and bright. James woke after 4 hours of restless sleep, mind already racing with plans. The list from Christmas morning had grown, become more specific, more actionable. But execution required delicacy. He made calls, quiet calls to people who owed him favors, who could move resources without drawing attention. A foundation director he'd funded years ago, a non-profit executive who specialized in community revitalization, an attorney who understood complex, charitable structures. By noon, he had the framework. By evening, he'd moved the first pieces into place. A small medical fund, anonymous, routed through 3 intermediaries, designated for families in Grace's zip code. Grants for educational expenses, administered through the church Pastor Williams led. A community center renovation, funded through a shell corporation that couldn't be traced back to Hartford Industries. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. That afternoon, he did what he'd been avoiding. He went to his office. The Hartford Industries headquarters stood downtown, 47 floors of steel and glass, a monument to efficiency and profit. James rode the elevator to the executive floor, nodding to staff who seemed surprised to see him on December 26th. Most of the building was empty. The few who came in did so out of ambition or fear, not necessity. His office waited, unchanged. Corner view, mahogany desk, leather chairs, photos of himself with politicians, celebrities, industry leaders. Not a single personal photo. Not a single indication that a human being worked here. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. The quarterly report mocked him from his inbox. Record profits, successful restructuring, shareholder value maximized. He'd spent his career chasing numbers that looked like this, numbers that had names attached, faces, children. He began drafting a proposal, a new division focused on community impact, investments in the regions where Hartford Industries operated, job training programs, partnership with local organizations, not charity, sustainable support that empowered rather than patronized. It would be expensive. The board would hate it. But he had enough clout, enough stock control to force the conversation. If he was willing to burn political capital, if he was willing to risk his position. He stared at the proposal, cursor blinking. 1 click. That's all it would take to send it to the board, to set wheels in motion he couldn't stop. His hand hovered over the mouse. A knock on his door. James looked up to find Theodore standing in the doorway, holding a visitor's badge and looking entirely out of place in his worn coat and sneakers. "How did you get up here?" James asked, standing. "I told security I had a delivery for Mr. Hartford." Theodore held up a manila envelope. "They called up, someone confirmed it, and they let me through. Adults don't really question kids who sound confident." Despite everything, James almost smiled. "That's alarmingly true. Does your mother know you're here?" "She knows I went out. She doesn't know where." Theodore walked further into the office, looking around with frank curiosity. "This is where you work?" "Yes. It's very empty." The observation stung. "What's in the envelope?" Theodore held it out. James took it, opened it carefully. Inside, a crayon drawing from Mia showing 3 figures holding hands under a Christmas tree. A thank you note in Grace's handwriting. And a newspaper clipping from 4 years ago. Obituary section. David Thompson, age 34, survived by wife Grace and children Theodore and Mia. James's hands shook. Mama doesn't know I kept that, Theodore said. Or that I brought it, but I thought you should see it, since you seem interested in our family. Theodore, do you know what it's like? The boy interrupted, his voice calm but his eyes fierce. To watch your dad disappear. Not die, that came after, but disappear. To watch him stop believing in himself, stop smiling, stop being the person who taught you that good things happen to good people? James couldn't speak. You asked me yesterday what you'd done. I don't know what you've done, but I know you're carrying something heavy. I can see it. Theodore's voice softened slightly. Mama says everyone deserves a chance to be better, even people who've done bad things. But you have to actually do better, not just feel bad about it. You're very wise for 10 years old. I've had to be. Theodore moved toward the door, then stopped. Mama would be angry if she knew I came here. She'd say I was rude, that I overstepped. Maybe I did, but I needed to see who you really are. And? I don't know yet. Theodore met his eyes with unnerving directness. But I think you don't know either, and maybe that's the first step, admitting you're lost. He left. James stood alone in his empty office, holding the obituary of a man he'd killed without knowing his name. David Thompson, 34 years old. Husband, father, devoted to his family and his work. Acceptable loss. James sat down, read the obituary 3 times, stared at Mia's drawing until the crayon figures blurred. Then he clicked send on the proposal. The wheels began to turn. That evening, Grace discovered Theodore had been gone. He admitted where he'd gone when pressed, though not what he'd said. Grace's face cycled through shock, anger, and something softer. Baby, you can't do things like that. That man, James, he's a stranger. You don't know what he's capable of. I know, Theodore said. But Mama, he's hurting. And you always say hurt people need truth spoken in love. So I spoke truth. Grace pulled him close, torn between pride and fear. You're too young to carry adults' burdens. I know, but they're already on me anyway. Might as well use them for something. She held him tighter. This child who'd grown up too fast, who saw too much, who carried weight he shouldn't have to lift. Pray with me, she whispered. They prayed together, for wisdom, for protection, for the sad man who'd wandered into their lives, and for David, whose absence shaped everything they'd become. In his penthouse across the city, James couldn't pray. Hadn't prayed since childhood, wasn't sure he remembered how, but he sat in the darkness and whispered into the void, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. No one answered, but somewhere, something had shifted, and morning would come regardless. December 27th began with deceptive normalcy. James arrived at Hartford Industries at 7 a.m., prepared for the board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. He'd sent the proposal the previous evening. By midnight, 3 board members had requested emergency calls. By 6 a.m., his phone was flooded with messages ranging from concerned to hostile. He ignored them all. The boardroom sat on the 45th floor, glass walls offering panoramic city views that usually reminded James why they'd built this empire. This morning, the height just made him dizzy. The board filed in, 12 men and women who represented shareholders, institutional investors, legacy families, people who measured success in stock points and quarterly returns. People like James had been. Like James still was, in every legal sense. Chairman Robert Morrison, 68, silver-haired, ruthless beneath his grandfather persona, sat at the head of the table. James, glad you could make it to your own crucifixion. Robert. James took his seat. I assume you've reviewed the responses to your proposal. Morrison's tone made the word sound obscene. I have. Then you understand it's dead on arrival. I understand you don't like it. That's not the same thing. Morrison's smile was thin. Let's be clear. You're proposing we divert, what was it, $40 million annually into community revitalization programs in regions where we've closed facilities. Programs that generate zero return, no strategic value, and frankly read like a guilty conscience trying to buy absolution. That's not, furthermore, Morrison continued, voice hardening. You're suggesting we create oversight committees, institute ethical impact reviews, and essentially handicap our operational flexibility to appease populations who already got severance packages. Minimal severance and no real transition support. Legal minimum, which is what minimum means. Another board member, Veronica Chen, CFO, pragmatic to a fault, leaned forward. James, we're concerned. This isn't like you. These proposals would crater our profit margins, spook investors, and invite regulatory scrutiny. What exactly prompted this sudden attack of corporate social responsibility? James had prepared for this question. He'd rehearsed responses that focused on long-term sustainability, brand reputation, stakeholder capitalism. But sitting in this room, looking at these faces, he found he couldn't lie. I met someone, he said simply. A family. They lost everything when we closed Riverside Manufacturing. The father died. The mother's been raising 2 children alone on nothing, and they showed me more grace in one evening than I've shown anyone in my entire career. Silence. Then Morrison laughed. Short, sharp, cruel. You're having a midlife crisis, he said, over one sob story. It's not. It is. James, listen to yourself. You met some poor family, felt guilty, and now you want to restructure corporate strategy based on emotions. This is business. We make hard decisions. People get hurt. That's capitalism. That's our choice, James countered. We choose who gets hurt. We choose what we prioritize, and I'm choosing differently now. Then you're choosing wrong. Veronica's voice was ice. James, you have fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. You can't just... I can. I'm CEO. I have discretionary authority. Had. Morrison interrupted. Past tense. James, effective immediately. You're on administrative leave pending board review. We'll be conducting a full assessment of your mental fitness and leadership capacity. The room went still. You can't do that, James said, but his voice lacked conviction. We can, and we are. Morrison stood. I'll be assuming interim CEO responsibilities. You'll maintain your board seat but have no operational authority. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks to determine next steps. This is because I'm trying to do the right thing. This is because you're letting personal feelings compromise business judgment. Veronica said, not unkindly. James, take the time off. Get your head straight. But understand, this company won't be held hostage to one man's guilt. They filed out. James sat alone in the boardroom, officially sidelined, watching his proposal die before it had a chance to breathe. His phone buzzed. Text from his attorney. Saw the board memo. Call me immediately. Then another from his assistant. Mr. Hartford, media's calling. Something leaked. James pulled up his email. His stomach dropped. The proposal had leaked, not just to media, but everywhere. Tech blogs, business journals, Twitter. Someone had sent the entire document, along with James's memo admitting personal motivation, to every major news outlet. Within an hour, it was everywhere. Hartford Industries CEO admits guilt over factory closures. Billionaire's crisis of conscience. Too little? Too late? CEO removed after proposing ethical reforms to board. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. James turned it off. At 4 p.m., Grace's phone buzzed with a news notification. She'd been folding laundry, half watching Mia Color, while Theodore did homework at the kitchen table. The notification showed a photo, a familiar face. Grace's hands went still. She clicked the article. Read it once. Then again, slower, making sure she understood. James Hartford, CEO of Hartford Industries, the company that had closed Riverside Manufacturing. The man who'd had dinner with them, who'd given them a ride home, who'd come to their church, the man she'd shown kindness to. Her hands started shaking. "Mama?" Theodore appeared at her elbow. "What's wrong?" She couldn't speak, just handed him the phone. Theodore read. His face went white. "Mama, You knew." Her voice came out flat. "When you went to his office yesterday, you knew who he was." "I suspected. I wasn't sure until—" "You knew and you didn't tell me." "I wanted to see if he'd tell you himself, if he was really trying to change or if he was just—" Theodore's voice broke. "I'm sorry, Mama. I should have said something." Grace sat down heavily. Mia climbed into her lap, sensing distress but not understanding its source. "Who's the man in the picture, Mama?" Mia asked. "Someone I trusted," Grace whispered. "Someone who lied to us." "He didn't lie," Theodore said carefully. "He just didn't tell the whole truth. That's the same thing." They sat in silence as dusk gathered outside. Grace's mind spun through every interaction, every word, every moment of kindness. Had any of it been real? Or had she been a project? A way for a guilty rich man to feel better about himself? Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. "Hello? Grace?" James's voice. "I know you've seen the news. I know you know who I am now, and I know I should have told you from the beginning. But please, let me explain." She hung up. He called back. She declined the call. A text appeared. "I understand if you never want to see me again, but please know that everything I felt, everything we shared, was real. The rest was cowardice. I'm sorry." Grace deleted it without responding. She pulled her children close and prayed. Not for James. Not yet. She prayed for wisdom, for discernment, for the ability to reconcile the kind man she'd met with the corporate leader who'd destroyed her husband. And she prayed for her heart, which had begun to trust again, and now felt shattered all over. Outside, snow began to fall. Again. Always again. Inside, Grace held her children and tried to remember how to breathe through betrayal. The confrontation came the next evening. James had spent 24 hours drowning in media coverage, legal calls, and the slow-motion destruction of his reputation. He'd made a decision by midnight. No more hiding. If Grace wanted answers, he'd give them. If she wanted to rage at him, he'd accept it. He owed her that much. He drove to her apartment building, parked illegally, climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, knocked. Theodore answered. His expression was careful, neutral. "Mama doesn't want to see you. I know, but I need to see her. Please." The boy studied him. "Wait here." He disappeared inside. James heard low voices, Grace's rising in anger, Theodore's calm responses. Then footsteps. Grace appeared in the doorway. She looked exhausted and furious. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "Outside. I'm not letting you near my children." They went to the building's front steps. Cold bit through James's coat. Grace wrapped her arms around herself but didn't sit. "Explain," she said. "From the beginning. And don't you dare lie to me again." So he did. He told her about Hartford Industries, about the acquisition of Riverside, about the decision to close the facility. He told her about the restructuring, the efficiency reports, the complete absence of human consideration in his calculus. He told her about never reading the letters, including hers. He told her about Christmas Eve, about recognizing her story too late, about the horror of realizing he was sitting with the consequences of his decisions made flesh. Grace listened without interrupting. Her face remained impassive until he mentioned her letter. "You didn't read it," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "You didn't read a letter from a widow begging for help." "No." "Why not?" "Because I didn't care. Because letters like yours were inconvenient truths I'd designed my entire system to filter out. Because I'd convinced myself that business required detachment." He forced himself to meet her eyes. "Because I was a coward." "And now? Why tell me now? Because you got caught." "Because you deserved the truth. Because hiding from you meant hiding from what I'd done. And because—" His voice cracked. "Because the kindness you showed me was real, and I couldn't let you waste it on a lie." Grace laughed, bitter, broken. "So this is your confession? You destroy my family, lie to my face, let me feed you and welcome you and treat you like a friend, and now you want absolution?" "No, I want accountability. I want to face what I did and not run from it anymore." "You want to feel better," she said. "That's what this is. Wealthy man feels guilty, throws money at the problem, expects the poor people to forgive him and make him feel whole again. That's not, isn't it?" She turned on him, eyes blazing. "Do you think your foundation fixes anything? Do you think writing checks can buy back my husband, can give my children their father? No. Then what exactly do you want from me, James?" "Nothing," he said honestly. "You don't owe me anything. Not forgiveness, not grace, not even acknowledgement. I just needed you to know the truth, to understand that the man you met at the airport, that was real. My guilt was real. My desire to change was real. The only thing that wasn't real was my courage to tell you who I was." Grace's face crumpled. "I let you sit with my children. I invited you to my church. I let myself believe—" She pressed her hands to her face. "I was starting to care about you, and it was all built on lies. Not lies, omissions. And I know that's not better, but Grace, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't say my name like we're friends. We're not friends. We can't be. Because every time I look at you, I'll see David. I'll see the years he's missed. I'll see my children growing up without their father because men like you decided profit mattered more than people. You're right. I don't need you to agree with me." Her voice broke. "I need you to leave. I need you to take your guilt and your money and your late-arriving conscience and get out of my life." "Grace, go!" James went. He drove home in silence, mind blank with shock. By the time he reached his penthouse, his phone was exploding with new notifications. The board had moved faster than expected. Emergency meeting, unanimous vote. James Hartford was officially removed as CEO, effective immediately. Morrison would take permanent control. The reform proposal was dead. Hartford Industries would continue as it always had. His attorney called, his accountant, his publicist. Everyone had advice, strategies, damage control options. James ignored them all. He sat in his empty penthouse and understood, finally, the true cost of his choices. He'd lost everything: position, reputation, respect. But worse, he'd lost Grace, had lost the possibility of redemption that her kindness had offered. And this time, there was no restructuring that could fix it, no efficiency report that could optimize away the pain. Just consequences, just the fall he'd earned, just the truth he'd avoided for 30 years, finally demanding payment. Outside, the city glittered with lights, thousands of lives he'd never considered, millions of moments he'd never valued. Inside, James Hartford sat in darkness and learned what it meant to have nothing, even when you still had everything. The first weeks of January arrived with brutal cold and unforgiving clarity. James Hartford woke each morning in his penthouse to silence that pressed against his ears like physical pressure. The media had moved on, but the damage remained permanent. He couldn't stand the emptiness. On January 3rd, he dressed in clothes he'd never worn, jeans, a plain coat, a baseball cap pulled low, and took the subway to Grace's neighborhood. The community center 3 blocks from her church advertised volunteer opportunities. The director barely glanced at his intake form. "Can you lift heavy things?" "Yes." "Great, we're reorganizing the food pantry." For 6 hours, James hauled boxes and sorted canned goods. His back ached, his hands blistered, and for the first time in weeks, his mind went quiet. He came back the next day, and the day after that. By mid-January, he had a routine: mornings at the community center, afternoons at a homeless shelter downtown, evenings alone. No one asked his name. No one cared about his credentials. They just needed hands, and his worked as well as anyone's. Sister Dorothy found him at the shelter one afternoon, serving lunch. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "James Hartford, former CEO." James's hands stilled. You're here now. That counts for something." She joined him serving. "But you need to understand, hurt takes time. It doesn't speed up because you're suffering too. Forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something that happens when the person who's been hurt decides they're ready." She left him with that thought. Grace was struggling. Anger had been easier, clean, simple, righteous. But as it ebbed, confusion remained. She'd replayed every conversation with James, looking for lies. What she found instead was genuine pain, which somehow made it worse. "Mama," Mia asked one evening, "is it bad to still like someone who did something bad?" Grace pulled her close. "People are complicated, baby. Someone can be kind to you and still have done harmful things. Both can be true. I think people can be bad and good at the same time," Mia said. "God still loves me even when I mess up." Grace had no answer. Later, she sat with her Bible, turning to passages about forgiveness. The verse stared back. "Forgive, and you will be forgiven." She wanted to. Holding on to anger was exhausting, but forgiveness felt like betrayal, like saying what happened to David was acceptable. She closed the Bible and whispered into the darkness, "David, what do I do?" Just silence. Theodore found James by accident, seeing him through the community center window carrying boxes. He went inside. "You're using a fake name," Theodore said when he approached. "John is my middle name. I wanted privacy." James set down his box. "Does your mother know you're here?" "No." Theodore crossed his arms. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I need to do something that matters." "Need to feel better about yourself?" "Need to do something that isn't about profit or power or personal gain." Theodore studied him. "I don't trust you. I want to, but I don't." "That's fair. But Mia asks about you, and Mama's confused. She wants to hate you, but she can't quite manage it." "I never wanted to hurt her more. My dad believed in second chances," Theodore said. "But he also said some things can't be fixed. Some damage is permanent." He turned to leave. "My dad used to say the proof of change isn't in words. It's in showing up. Day after day, when no one's watching, that's when you know if someone's real." He left James alone with that truth. Grace called Pastor Williams. "I need to talk about James Hartford." They met the next morning. Grace poured out everything: the betrayal, the confusion, the unbearable compassion that kept creeping in. "I want to hate him," she said, "but I keep remembering his face, the genuine remorse. Hate is easier than complexity." Pastor Williams said, "But complexity is where we actually live." "So what do I do?" Forgiveness doesn't mean trusting him again, doesn't mean relationship. It means releasing your right to vengeance, placing the judgment in God's hands. He paused. You move toward it when you can. You rest when you need to. God is patient with our healing. Grace left with no resolution, but somehow less burdened. The work of forgiveness had begun, not because James deserved it, but because Grace deserved peace. The month had passed in slow, painful increments. James had worked, Grace had wrestled, Theodore had watched, Mia had prayed, and somewhere in the grinding passage of days something had shifted, not healed, not resolved, but shifted. February was coming, and with it, new possibilities. James woke to unexpected sunlight, the first clear morning after weeks of grey. His phone showed 3 emails, one from his attorney about severance, one from a headhunter, one from the community centre asking if he could help with furniture delivery. He deleted the first 2, responded to the third. He'd spent the last 3 weeks of January consulting with non-profit specialists and community organisers. Not corporate lawyers, but people who understood grassroots change. The framework had taken shape, a foundation, structured differently than typical philanthropy. Community-led boards, local decision-making, sustained support rather than one-time grants, accountability mechanisms ensuring the foundation served communities, not the founder's ego. He'd liquidated $30 million of Hartford Industries stock, not enough to erase damage, but enough to build something sustainable. The mission statement was simple: to support communities affected by corporate decisions with sustainable resources, local leadership, and genuine partnership, to prioritize people over profit. Pastor Williams met him at a coffee shop. James slid a folder across the table. I'm starting a foundation, community-focused, locally led. I need guidance from people these communities trust. The pastor scanned the documents. This is substantial. I want communities to decide what they need. Your church has served this neighborhood for 40 years. Join the board, help establish connections, ensure we're accountable. Why are you really doing this? Because I can't undo what I've done, but I can use my resources, gained partly through harm, to build something better. Not as redemption, as responsibility. And if Grace never forgives you, then she never forgives me. This happens anyway. Pastor Williams studied him. People will question your motives. Let them. I know the truth. The people we help will know the truth. I'll pray on this. The pastor said, But James, I think you're on the right path. Not easy, not guaranteed, but faithful. Theodore attended career day at school, listening to Elena Rodriguez from the Community Partnership Fund discuss non-profit management. During Q&A, Theodore raised his hand. How do you know if someone wanting to help actually cares? You watch what they do when no one's looking, Elena said. Real commitment shows up in boring consistency, not grand gestures. But what if they hurt people before? People can change, but change is demonstrated over time, through sustained action. And even real change doesn't erase consequences. That evening, Theodore told Grace about seeing James at the community center. He's been there since early January, every day. Sister Dorothy says he's different. Quiet, doesn't make a big deal. Just works. Grace sat down heavily. Why are you telling me now? Because I heard about real change today. About boring consistency. Theodore met her eyes. I think maybe he's really trying. Not for us. Just because it's right. I thought you should know. Grace pulled him close. Thank you. Theodore found James at the community center. They sat outside on the steps. I told Mama you've been volunteering. Theodore said, I also saw something about a foundation. Is that real? Yes. My teacher says actions speak louder than words, so I'm watching. Theodore paused. I think you're trying. Really trying. That counts for something. Not everything. Not forgiveness. But something. He pulled a folded paper from his backpack. This is a copy of Mama's letter. the one you never read. Read it now. Understand what you did. Then decide if your foundation is enough." James took the letter with shaking hands. Theodore walked away. James read Grace's plea, the raw desperation, the broken faith, David's death. He read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. This was his to carry. Forever. No foundation could erase this, but he could honor it, could let it shape every decision forward. He stood, put the letter in his pocket, and went back inside. The work continued. The Community Foundation for Sustainable Change launched quietly. $30 million. Community-led board. Focus on Hartford Industries' affected communities. Pastor Williams called that evening. The church board voted. We're in. One condition. Grace gets final say on programs affecting our community. Agreed, James said immediately. He sat in his penthouse, holding a copy of Grace's letter, allowing himself one small moment of hope. Not for forgiveness, not for reconciliation, but for purpose, for meaningful work, for a life built on accountability. It wasn't enough, but it was something. And something was infinitely better than the nothing he'd been living before. Winter began its slow retreat. The days lengthened incrementally, sunlight arriving earlier each morning and lingering a few minutes longer each evening. Grace noticed these small changes the way she'd learned to notice all small mercies, with gratitude born from scarcity. She'd been wrestling with faith in ways she hadn't since David's death. The questions felt different now, more complex. How do you forgive someone who destroyed your life while simultaneously trying to repair it? How do you hold both betrayal and genuine remorse in the same space? Pastor Williams had given her homework. Prayer, yes, but also observation. Watch for the fruits, he'd said. Real transformation produces evidence. Look for it without prejudice. She hadn't expected to find it so quickly. On February 28th, Grace attended a church meeting about community programs. Sister Dorothy mentioned the new foundation's grant for after-school tutoring. Fully funded, no strings attached, community-controlled. They're different, Sister Dorothy said. Asked what we needed instead of telling us. Wrote the check and stepped back. That's rare. Grace said nothing, but she listened. A week later, she ran into Maria Gonzalez at the grocery store, a woman from church whose husband had also lost his job when Riverside closed. Maria's face was brighter than Grace had seen in years. Grace, did you hear? The foundation. They're offering job training programs. Real ones, not the useless classes the government provides. My Carlos starts next week. Welding certification, all expenses paid, guaranteed job placement afterward. Maria grabbed Grace's hands. 4 years we've been struggling. 4 years. And suddenly help appears. Grace congratulated her, genuinely happy. But her mind churned. That evening, she looked up the foundation's website, read the mission statement, reviewed the board composition, majority community members, including Pastor Williams, examined the grants awarded, medical assistance, educational support, business development, all in communities Hartford Industries had damaged, all structured to empower rather than patronize. She closed her laptop, unsettled. This wasn't performance. This was systematic accountability, the kind that cost real money and required genuine humility, the kind that might actually be authentic. Mia had been unusually quiet during dinner. Grace noticed but didn't press. Her daughter would speak when ready. After Theodore went to do homework, Mia climbed into Grace's lap. Mama, I wrote something. For the sad mister. Can you give it to him? She held out a piece of paper covered in crayon drawings, stick figures holding hands, a bright sun, flowers in impossible colors, in careful block letters. Thank you for trying to be better. Love, Mia. Grace's throat tightened. Baby, I don't know if... Please, Mama, he was sad. Maybe he's still sad. Miss Edna says when someone's trying hard, we should tell them we see it. I see it, don't you? Grace looked at her daughter's earnest face. 6 years old and already understanding Grace better than most adults. I don't know what I see yet. Grace admitted. That's okay. You can give it to him when you know. Grace folded the note carefully, placed it in her Bible, looked at it every day for the next week, unable to decide. Grace stood in the church basement, sorting donations for the community closet. Her hands moved automatically. Pants here, shirts there, children's clothes in separate bins, while her mind wandered. She'd been praying for clarity, for peace, for the ability to see past her pain to whatever truth existed beyond it. Theodore appeared at her elbow. Mama, can I ask you something? Always. If someone breaks something precious, then spends years carefully fixing it, piece by piece, even though they know it'll never be perfect again, is that redemption? Grace set down the shirt she was folding. Where's this coming from? I've been thinking about Dad, about James, about what forgiveness means. Theodore's voice was thoughtful, measured. I was so angry at James, still am sometimes, but I've been watching him, really watching. He shows up every day, works hard, doesn't advertise it. The foundation he started, it's helping people, Mama. Real people. Mrs. Gonzalez's husband. The Johnson's daughter got a scholarship. The clinic got new equipment. I know. And he's not doing it for attention. He could be. Rich people usually do. But he's not. Theodore met her eyes. I'm not saying you have to forgive him. That's your choice. But I think maybe he's really trying to be different. And Dad would say that matters. Grace pulled him close. This child who'd grown up too fast, who saw too much, who somehow still believed in the possibility of change. Your father would be proud of you, she whispered. Would he be proud of me if I forgave James? The question hung in the air. Grace didn't have an answer. But that night, she pulled out Mia's note. Read it again. Looked at the stick figures holding hands, the bright, impossible sun. Thank you for trying to be better. Such simple wisdom. Such devastating grace. Grace knelt beside her bed and prayed. Not for answers this time, just for the strength to remain open. To let faith do its slow work. To trust that God could handle the complexity even when she couldn't. Outside, the last snow of winter melted into spring. Inside, Grace felt something thawing in her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the first tender movement towards it. The seed planted by a 6-year-old's crayon drawing and a 10-year-old's careful observation. The beginning of something Grace couldn't name, but desperately needed. Spring arrived tentatively, as if uncertain of its welcome. Trees budded with cautious green. Crocuses pushed through still cold earth. The city shed its winter grey like an old coat. Grace had made her decision. Not about complete forgiveness, she wasn't there yet, but about next steps, about being willing to stand in the same space as James Hartford and speak truth without hatred. She'd called Pastor Williams, who'd arranged it with James. A neutral meeting, the community garden behind the church, where spring planting was beginning, public enough to feel safe, private enough for honest conversation. Grace arrived early, needing the time to steady herself. She found James already there, working alongside other volunteers to prepare beds for planting. He wore old jeans and a faded shirt, his hands dirty, his face more weathered than she remembered. He looked up when she approached. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something like fear. Grace. James. She stood several feet away, maintaining distance. Can we talk? Of course. He set down his tools, wiped his hands on his jeans. gestured toward a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. "Here, okay?" They sat with space between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "I've been watching, from a distance, the foundation, the volunteering, the way you've changed your life. I didn't do it for you to see. I know, that's part of why I'm here." She turned to face him. "I need to say some things, and I need you to just listen. Can you do that?" "Yes." "What you did, what your company did, it destroyed us. Not just financially, spiritually. David died believing he'd failed, believing his loyalty meant nothing. That's a wound I'll carry forever. My children will carry it forever." James nodded, eyes glistening. "I wanted to hate you. It would have been easier, clean, simple." Grace's voice remained steady. "But my faith won't let me live in hatred. And my children, they see things I'm too hurt to see, clearly. Theodore watches you work. Mia prays for you every night. They're teaching me something I don't want to learn, but need to." "What's that?" "That people can be broken and whole at the same time. That someone can cause terrible harm and genuinely try to repair it. That redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about taking responsibility for it." James wiped his face. I'm not finished." Grace's tone was firm, but not unkind. "I'm choosing to forgive you, not because you've earned it, not because your foundation fixes what you broke, not because enough time has passed. I'm choosing it because carrying this anger is poisoning me. Because my children need to see grace in action, not just theory. Because my faith demands it." She reached into her purse, pulled out Mia's crayon drawing, handed it to him. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, doesn't mean trust, doesn't mean relationship. It means I'm releasing my right to vengeance. I'm placing the judgment in God's hands. I'm choosing peace for myself, not absolution for you." James took the drawing with shaking hands. "Read Mia's message." His shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't deserve this." "You don't. None of us deserve grace. That's why it's called grace." They sat in silence while the cherry blossoms drifted around them like snow. Around them, volunteers worked, planting seeds, preparing soil, building something new from old ground. Theodore emerged from the church carrying seed packets. He stopped when he saw them together, his face carefully neutral. Then he approached, sat beside his mother. "Mr. Hartford," he said formally. "Theodore. Mama told me she was coming to talk to you. I wanted to be here." The boy's voice was serious, older than his years. "I need you to understand something. Forgiveness isn't permission. My mum forgiving you doesn't mean what you did was okay. It doesn't mean we forget Dad. It doesn't mean you're part of our family." "I understand. But," Theodore continued, "it does mean we see you trying, really trying, and that matters. Not enough to fix everything, but enough to acknowledge." He held out his hand. "I don't trust you yet, but I'm willing to believe you can become someone trustworthy." James shook the boy's hand, tears streaming freely now. "That's more than I have any right to ask." Grace stood. "We should go, but James, keep doing what you're doing. Not for us, for yourself, for the people who need it. Redemption isn't a destination, it's a direction. Keep walking." "I will." She and Theodore walked away, leaving James on the bench with Mia's drawing. As they reached the church, Grace felt something release in her chest. Not all the pain, not all the grief, but the sharp edge of it, the part that had been cutting her from the inside. "Are you okay, Mama?" Theodore asked. "I am," she said, and meant it. Behind them, James Hartford sat alone with a child's forgiveness drawn in crayon. He folded it carefully, placed it in his wallet next to Grace's letter. 2 documents, 2 truths, the harm he'd caused and the grace he'd been given. He would carry both, forever, as he should. Spring unfolded into summer with the slow persistence of healing. James continued his routine, volunteering mornings, foundation work afternoons, evenings in the modest apartment he'd moved to in May. The penthouse had sold to a tech executive. James felt only relief watching it go. The new place was ordinary. 2 bedrooms, galley kitchen, neighbors who became friends, a retired teacher, a young family with twins, a graduate student practicing violin at odd hours. James learned their names, held doors, helped carry groceries, became part of a community rather than above it. The foundation grew beyond his initial vision. By June, 47 grants across 8 communities. Pastor Williams proved invaluable, connecting them with churches that understood local needs. Grace approved every program affecting her community, though she worked through the pastor rather than engaging directly with James. He understood. Forgiveness didn't require proximity. Theodore stopped by the community center occasionally, ostensibly to volunteer, but often ending in conversation with James. They talked about school, books, responsibility, and change. The boy was cautious, but no longer hostile. Mia he saw only in passing, glimpses at church events, her purple coat visible in crowds. She'd wave enthusiastically. Grace would offer a small nod of acknowledgement. It was enough. Summer gave way to autumn. James marked seasons by the community garden, tomatoes in July, pumpkins in September, final harvest in October. He'd learned to plant, to weed, to coax life from soil. Sister Dorothy teased him about his sunburn, but praised his dedication. "You've got farmer's hands now," she observed one October afternoon. "Rich man's hands go soft. Yours are strong." By November, the foundation had helped more than 300 families. James read every report, every testimonial. Not to congratulate himself, but to remember why this mattered. He'd framed Maria Gonzalez's letter, thanking them for the welding program that changed her husband's life. "You gave us back hope. That's worth more than money." Thanksgiving arrived. James volunteered at 3 community dinners, serving turkey to hundreds. He saw Grace at one. She was coordinating the children's area. Their eyes met across the room. She smiled briefly before turning back to a crying toddler. That small smile sustained him for weeks. December arrived with first snow on the 10th. A year ago he'd been counting down to layoffs, drowning in isolation. Now he was counting down to Christmas and feeling something close to peace. The community center's holiday party happened on December 18th. Theodore arrived with Pastor Williams, both carrying donated toys. "Hey, James," Theodore said. First time the boy had used his first name. They worked together sorting toys. Theodore had grown taller, his face less childlike but lighter somehow. "Mama's been different lately," Theodore said casually. "Happier. She smiles more, laughs with me and Mia instead of just smiling at us. She deserves happiness." "She does." Theodore paused. "She talks about forgiveness a lot now, says it freed her, says she didn't realize how much weight she was carrying until she put it down." James's hands stilled. "She asked me something last week, asked if I'd be okay seeing you on Christmas Eve." Theodore met his eyes. "I said yes." "Seeing me where?" "She's still deciding, but I think she wants to invite you to something. I wanted to tell you so you wouldn't be surprised. And so you'd know, if she invites you, it's real. She wants you there." James couldn't speak. Finally, "Thank you for telling me." The envelope arrived by mail, Grace's handwriting. James opened it with shaking hands. A card with a nativity scene. Inside, James. "A year ago, you stumbled into our lives on Christmas Eve, broken and searching. You've spent the year becoming someone different, not perfect, but faithful. Someone David would have respected. Our family would be honored if you'd join us for Christmas Eve service and dinner afterward. Simple meal, nothing fancy. But we'd like you to be part of it. This isn't charity, it's genuine welcome. 7 p.m. service. Dinner at 9 p.m. at our place. Grace, Theodore, and Mia P.S. Mia insists I tell you she's making cookies. Theodore says, wear something comfortable. I'm saying come as you are. James read it 5 times, cried through the 4th and 5th. He texted Pastor Williams, did you know about this? Response, she prayed on it a lot. This is genuine, James. She's ready. The question is, are you? He thought about the year past, the work, the transformation. From the man who'd signed layoffs without reading letters to the man who planted tomatoes and served the homeless. He typed, I'm ready. James arrived at church at 6:45 p.m., wearing comfortable clothes as Theodore suggested. James! Mia's voice. She ran through the snow, purple coat flying, light-up sneakers flashing. You came! She crashed into him. James knelt to her level. I wouldn't miss it. Grace and Theodore reached them. Thank you for inviting me, James said to Grace. It means more than I can say. You've earned the invitation, Grace said simply. Inside the church, inside our home, you're just James. Just a man trying to live faithfully. That's who we're welcoming. The service began with, O come, all ye faithful. James's voice cracked on high notes, but Mia held his hand through the entire song. Pastor Williams preached about unexpected grace, about how God entered the world not in palaces but stables. Divine love shows up where we least expect it, in strangers' kindness, in second chances we don't deserve but desperately need. His eyes found James, a small, knowing smile. During candlelight service, Mia carefully lit James's candle from her own. Don't drop it, she whispered. It's Jesus' light. We have to protect it. I will, James whispered back. I promise. They sang Silent Night in candlelight. James cried openly, not from sadness but overwhelming gratitude. A year ago, alone in an airport lounge. Now surrounded by light, by community, by family not his by blood, but who'd claimed him anyway. Grace glanced over, saw his tears, and didn't look away. She simply nodded. Acknowledgement, acceptance, validation that he belonged. They walked through snowy streets to Grace's apartment. At the building, James hesitated. Grace, before we go up, I see David's photos in church. I see his influence in your children. I never want you to feel like I'm trying to replace what you lost. Grace was quiet for a moment. You couldn't replace David if you tried. He was their father, always will be. But our circle can grow without diminishing what came before. You're not taking his place. You're standing in your own space, one we're choosing to make room for. Theodore added, Dad would want Mama to have friends. He was generous, welcoming, like Mama is. Like you both are, James said. The apartment looked exactly as James remembered. David's photos still lined the walls, but felt celebratory now, rather than mournful. Grace had made honey ham, green beans, homemade rolls, sweet potato casserole. Mia had made cookies, slightly burned, liberally frosted, absolutely beautiful. They gathered around the table, joining hands. Theodore, Grace said, would you pray? Dear God, thank you for this food and for family, the family we were born into and the family we choose. Thank you for second chances. Thank you for Mama's strength and Mia's joy, and for James, who's learning to be better. Help us remember Dad with love, but live with hope. Amen. Dinner was laughter and stories and warmth. After, they opened presents. For James, a framed photo of the community garden with Theodore's note. You helped plant this. Thanks for growing with us. Mia gave him a bookmark. Best friend James, in glitter letters. Grace gave him a book, No Future Without Forgiveness by Desmond Tutu. Inside, for the journey ahead, with gratitude for the journey so far, Grace. As midnight approached, Mia grew drowsy. At bedtime, she insisted, James has to say goodnight. That's the rule for family. James read The Velveteen Rabbit to both children. When he reached the passage about becoming real through love, his voice caught. You okay? Theodore asked. Yes, it's a good story. It's about becoming real. Mia murmured sleepily. Like you did, James. You were all shiny but not real. Now you're real. James smiled. I am real now, and that's infinitely better. At 1 a.m. he stood to leave. Grace walked him to the door. Thank you, he said, for forgiveness I don't deserve, for welcome I never expected, for showing me what grace actually looks like. Thank you for receiving it, Grace said. They hugged briefly, friends, equals. Merry Christmas, James. Merry Christmas, Grace. He walked home through silent, snow-covered streets, past houses with lit windows and sleeping families. James looked up at barely visible stars and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Not because he'd earned it, not because he deserved it, but because grace, real, costly, devastating grace, had been offered freely. And he'd been brave enough to accept it. James woke Christmas morning to sunlight and the neighbors' twins squealing over new toys. His phone showed messages. Marcus wishing Merry Christmas, Carmen asking about the community center dinner, Pastor Williams with a verse about being children of God. On the table sat last night's gifts, Theodore's garden photo, Mia's bookmark, Grace's book. He'd stayed up reading about forgiveness and liberation. His phone rang. Grace's name. Merry Christmas, James. Mia is having a crisis. Convinced she didn't tell you the right time for dinner. Can you come at 2 p.m.? I'd love to. At the bakery, the owner recognized him. Thanks for what you're doing with the foundation. Real change, not just talk. We notice. James carried that affirmation to Grace's apartment. Mia opened the door immediately. You came, and you brought the good bread. They spent the afternoon building gingerbread houses and playing games. At 2 p.m., they gathered for dinner. Grace looked at James with clear eyes. Before we eat, I want to say something. A year ago, our lives intersected unexpectedly. We've learned about forgiveness, about how complicated people can be, and we've learned that family isn't always who you're born to. She paused. James, you've shown up this year with consistent presence and genuine change. What I'm saying is, you're not borrowing us anymore. If you want it, you have a place at this table, permanent, as part of this family. Mia bounced. That means you're like our uncle. Theodore smiled. You're ours now, if you want to be. I would be honored. James managed. More honored than I can express. Then it's settled. Grace raised her glass. To family. After dinner, as Mia dozed against James on the couch, Grace picked up David's photo from the windowsill. She handed it to James. David would want you to have this, a reminder. Not to carry guilt, to carry memory, to remember why your work matters. James took it with trembling hands. I'll honor this, I promise. At bedtime, James read to the children. When he finished, Mia murmured sleepily, You were all shiny but not real. Now you're real. At midnight, James stood to leave. Same time next year? Grace asked. Every year, for as long as you'll have me. He walked home through silent streets, stars visible above. In his pocket, David's photo. In his wallet, Grace's letter and Mia's drawing. In his heart, the belief that redemption was actual, not just possible. Back home, James placed David's photo on his bookshelf. He opened his laptop to the Foundation's annual report. Hundreds of families helped, communities strengthened. One testimonial from a widow. "Your foundation gave me hope that the system could care about people like us." James closed the laptop, humbled. Success wasn't about building empires. Success was showing up, day after day, letting yourself be transformed by love, accepting grace when offered. Success was being welcomed to a table you once didn't deserve to approach. Success was becoming real, shabby and worn but authentic, loved into being. He fell asleep wrapped in grace he didn't deserve, but had learned to receive. Outside, snow began to fall, covering old scars with new possibility. Inside, a man once lost had finally found his way home, not to a place, to a people, to a purpose, to himself. And in the morning, he would do it all again. Because that's what love looked like. That's what redemption required. That's what grace made possible. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.